Alright, welcome back. I don't have my headphones on right now because they're hurting my ear. So if the sound sounds odd, I might end up re-uploading this, but we'll see. So last time we left off on, what chapter was that? Let's take a look. The Mire of Drosleona. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't really remember what happened. It's been a little while since I've read. Looks like they were drinking. Yeah, I don't know. Watch the last one. But right now we're on Trail of Oil, which is chapter 34. What was I thinking? Wondered Eragon in the morning. His head was pounding, and his tongue felt thick and fuzzy. As a rat skittered under the floor, Eragon winced at the noise. "How are we feeling?" asked Saphira smugly. Eragon ignored her. A moment later, Brahm rolled out of bed with a grumble. He doused his head in cold water from the basin, then left the room. Eragon followed him into the hallway. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To recover." "I'll come." At the bar, Eragon discovered that Brahm's method of recovery involved imbibing copious amounts of hot tea and ice water, washing it all down with brandy. When they returned to the room, Eragon was able to function somewhat better. Brahm belted on his sword and smoothed the wrinkles out of his robe.
"The first thing we need to do is ask some discreet questions. I want to find out why the seether oil was delivered in Drosleona, and where it was taken from there. Most likely, soldiers or workmen were involved in transporting it. We have to find some of those men and get one to talk."
They left the Golden Globe and searched for the warehouses where the seether oil might have been delivered. Near the center of Drosleona, the streets began to slant upward, towards a place of polished granite. It was built on a rise, so that it towered above every building except the cathedral. The courtyard was a mosaic of mother of pearl, and parts of the walls were inlaid with gold. Black statues stood in alcoves, with sticks of incense smoking in their cold hands. Soldiers stationed every 4 yards watched passers-by keenly. "Who lives there?" asked Eragon in awe.
"Marcus Tubor, ruler of this city. He answers to the king and his own conscience, which hasn't been very active recently," said Brahm.
They walked around the palace, looked at the gated, ornate houses that surrounded it. By midday, they had learned nothing useful, so they stopped for lunch.
"This city is far too vast for us to comb it together," said Brahm. "Search on your own. Meet me at the Golden Globe by dusk."
He glowered at Eragon from under his bushy eyebrows.
"I'm trusting you not to do anything stupid."
"I won't," promised Eragon. Brahm handed him some coins, then strode away in the opposite direction. Throughout the rest of the day, Eragon talked with the shopkeepers and workers, trying to be as pleasant and charming as he could. His questions led him from one end of the city to the other and back again. No one seemed to know about the oil. Wherever he went, the cathedral stared down at him. It was impossible to escape its tall spires. At last he found a man who helped ship the seether oil and remembered to which warehouse it had been taken. Eragon excitedly went to look at the building, but then returned to the Golden Globe. It was over an hour before Brahm came back, slumped with fatigue. "Did you find anything?" asked Eragon. Brahm brushed back his white hair.
"I had a great deal of interesting things today, not the least of which is that Galbatorix will visit Drosleona within a week."
"What?" exclaimed Eragon. Brahm slouched against the wall, lines on his forehead deepening.
"It seems that Tabor has taken a few too many liberties with his power, so Galbatorix has decided to come teach him a lesson of humility. It's the first time the king has left Irabine in over 10 years.
"Do you think he knows of us?" asked Eragon.
"Of course he knows of us, but I'm sure he hasn't been told of our location. If he had, we would already be in the Razak's grasp. However, this means that whatever we're going to do, the Razak must be accomplished before Galbatorix arrives. We don't want to be anywhere within 20 leagues of him. The one thing in favor is that the Razak are sure to be here, preparing for his visit."
I want to get the Razak, said Eragon, his fists tightening. But not if it means fighting the king. He could probably tear me to pieces. That seemed to amuse Brahm.
Very good. Caution. And you're right. You wouldn't stand a chance against Galbatorix. Now, tell me what you learned today. It might confirm what I heard.
Eragon shrugged. It was mostly drivel, but I did talk with a man who knew where the oil was taken. It's just an old warehouse. Other than that, I didn't discover anything useful.
My day was a little more fruitful than yours. I heard the same thing you did, so I went to the warehouse and talked with the workers. It didn't take much cajoling before they revealed that the cases of cedar oil were always sent from the warehouse to the palace.
And that's when you came back here, finished Eragon.
No, it's not. Don't interrupt. After that, I went to the palace and got myself invited into the servants' quarters as a bard. For several hours I wandered about, amusing the maids and others with songs and poems, and asking questions all the while.
Brahm slowly filled his pipe with tobacco.
It's amazing, really, all the things servants find out. Did you know that one of the earls has 3 mistresses, and they all live in the same wing of the palace?
He shook his head and lit a pipe.
Aside from the fascinating tidbits, I was told quite by accident where the oil was taken from the palace.
And that is, asked Eragon impatiently. Brahm puffed on the pipe and blew a smoke ring.
Out of the city, of course. Every full moon, 2 slaves are sent to the base of Helgrind with a month's worth of provisions. Whether the cedar oil arrives in Drasleona, they send it along with provisions. The slaves are never seen again. And the one time someone followed them, he disappeared too.
I thought the riders demolished the slave trade, said Eragon.
Unfortunately, it has flourished under the king's reign.
So the Razak are in Helgrind, said Eragon, thinking of the rock mountain.
There or somewhere nearby.
If they are in Helgrind, they'll be either at the bottom and protected by a thick stone door, or higher up, where there are only flying mountains, or Saphira can reach. Top or bottom, their shelter will no doubt be disguised. He thought for a moment. If Saphira and I go flying around Helgrind, the Razak are sure to see us, not to mention all of Drasleona.
It is a problem, agreed Brahm.
Eragon frowned. What if we took the place of the 2 slaves? The full moon isn't far off. It would give us the perfect opportunity to get close to the Razak. Brahm tugged his beard thoughtfully.
That's chancy at best. If the slaves are killed from a distance, we'll be in trouble. We can't harm the Razak if they aren't in sight.
We don't know if the slaves are killed at all, Eragon pointed out.
I'm sure they are,
said Brahm, his face grave. Then his eyes sparkled, and he blew another smoke ring.
Still, it's an intriguing idea. If it were done with Saphira hidden nearby, and his voice trailed off, it might work. But we've got to move quickly. With the king coming, there isn't much time.
Should we go to Helgrind and look around? It would be good to see the land in the daylight, so we won't be surprised by any ambushes, said Eragon. Brahm fingered his staff.
That can be done later. Tomorrow I'll return to the palace and figure out how we can replace the slaves. I have to be careful not to arouse suspicion, though. I could easily be revealed by spies and courtiers who know about the Razak.
I can't believe it. We've actually found them, said Eragon quietly. An image of his dead uncle and burned farm flashed into his mind. His jaw tightened.
The toughest part is yet to come. But yes, we've done well, said Brahm. If fortune smiles on us, you may soon have your revenge, and Varden will be rid of a dangerous enemy. What comes after that will be up to you.
Eragon opened his mind and jubilantly told Saphira, We found the Razak's lair. Where? He quickly explained what they had discovered. Helgrind, she mused, a fitting place for them. Eragon agreed. When we're done here, maybe we could visit Carva Hall. What is it you want? She asked, suddenly sour. To go back to your previous life? You know that won't happen, so stop mooing after it. After a certain point, you have to decide what to commit. Will you hide for the rest of your life, or will you help the Varden? Those are the only options left to you, unless you join forces with Galbatorix, which I do not and never will accept. Softly he said, If I must choose, I cast my fate with the Varden, as well you know. Yes, but sometimes you have to hear yourself say it. She left him to ponder her words. Chapter 35. Worshippers of Helgrind. I'm just going to see how long this one is. Okay, we'll do this one as well. ERAGON was alone in the room when he woke. Scrawled into the wall with a charcoal stick was a note that read,
ERAGON, I will be gone until late tonight. Coins and food are under the mattress. Explore the city, enjoy yourself, but stay unnoticed. Brom. P.S. Avoid the palace. Don't go anywhere near without keeping your bow. And keep it strung.
ERAGON wiped the wall clean, then retrieved the money from under the bed. He slipped the bow across his back, thinking, I wish I didn't have to go armed all the time. He left the Golden Globe and ambled through the streets, stopping to observe whatever interested him. There were many intriguing stores, but none quite as exciting as Angela's herb shop in Term. At times he glared at the dark, claustrophobic houses and wished that he were free of the city. When he grew hungry, he bought a wedge of cheese and a loaf of bread and ate them, sitting on a curb. Later, in the far corner of Jasleona, he heard an auctioneer rattling off lists of prices. Curious, he headed towards the voice and arrived at a wide opening between two buildings. 10 men stood on a waist-high platform. Arrayed before them was a richly dressed crowd that was both colorful and boisterous. Where are the goods for sale? Wondered ERAGON. The auctioneer finished his list and mentioned for a young man behind the platform to join him. The man awkwardly climbed up, chains dragging at his hands and feet. And here we have our first item, proclaimed the auctioneer. A healthy male from the Hederic Desert, captured just a month, and in excellent condition. Look at those arms and legs. He's strong as a bull. He'll be perfect as a shield bearer, or, if you don't trust him for that, hard laborer. But let me tell you, lords and ladies, that would be a waste. He's bright as a nail, if you can get him to talk a civilized tongue. The crowd laughed, and ERAGON ground his teeth with fury. His lips started to form a word that would free the slave, and his arm, newly liberated from the splint, rose. The mark on his palm shimmered. He was about to release the magic when it struck him. He'd never get away. The slave would be caught before he reached the city walls. ERAGON would only make the situation worse if he tried to help. He lowered his arm and quietly cursed. Think. This is how you got into trouble with the Urgles. He watched helplessly as the slave was sold to a tall, hawk-nosed man. The next slave was a tiny girl, no more than 6 years old, wrenched from the arms of her crying mother. As the auctioneer started bidding, ERAGON forced himself to walk away, rigid with fury and outrage. It was several blocks before the weeping was inaudible. I'd like to see a thief try to cut my purse right now, he thought grimly, almost wishing it would happen. Frustrated, he punched a nearby wall, bruising his knuckles. That's the sort of thing I could stop by fighting the Empire, he realized. With Saphira by my side, I could free those slaves. I've been graced with special powers. It would be selfish of me not to use them for the benefit of others. If I don't, I might as well not be a rider at all. It was a while before he took stock of his bearings, and was surprised to find himself before the cathedral. Its twisted spires were covered with statues and scrollwork. Snarling gargoyles crouched among the eaves, fantastic beasts writhed on the walls, and heroes and kings marched along their bottom edges. Froze in cold marble, ribbed arches and tall stained glass windows lined the cathedral's sides, along with columns of differing sizes. A lonely turret helmed the building like a mast. Recessed in shadow at the cathedral's front was an iron-bound door inlaid with a row of silver script that ERAGON recognized as the ancient language. As best he could tell, it read, May thee who enter here understand thine impertinence, and forget thine attachments to that which is beloved. The entire building sent a shiver down ERAGON's spine. There was something menacing about it, as if it was a predator crouched in the city, waiting for its next victim. A broad row of steps led to the cathedral's entrance. Eragon solemnly ascended them and stopped before the door. I wonder if I can go in. Almost guiltily, he pushed on the door. It swung open smoothly, gliding on oiled hinges. He stepped inside. The silence of a forgotten tomb filled the empty cathedral. The air was chill and dry. Bare walls extended to the vaulted ceiling that was so high Eragon felt no taller than an ant. Stained glass windows depicted scenes of anger, hate, and remorse pierced the walls, while spectral beams of light washed sections of the granite pews with transparent hues, leaving the rest in shadow. His hands were shaded a deep blue. Between the windows stood statues with rigid, pale eyes. He returned their stern gazes, and slowly strode up to the center row, afraid to break the quiet. His leather boots padded noiselessly on the polished stone floor. The altar was a great slab of stone devoid of adornment. The solitary finger of light fell upon it, illuminating motes of golden dust floating in the air. Behind the altar, the pipes of a wind organ pierced the ceiling and opened themselves to the elements. The instrument would play its own music when a gale rocked Trasleona. Out of respect, Eragon knelt before the altar and bowed his head. He did not pray, but paid homage to the cathedral itself, the sorrows of the lives it had witnessed, as well as the unpleasantness of the ornate pageantry that played out between its walls. Emanating from the stones, it was a forbidding place, bare and cold. In that chilling touch, though, came a glimpse of eternity and perhaps the powers that lay there. Finally, Eragon inclined his head and rose. Calm and grave, he whispered words to himself in the ancient language, then turned to leave. He froze. His heart jumped, hammering like a drum. The Razak stood at the cathedral's entrance, watching him. Their swords were drawn, keen edges bloody in a crimson light. A sibilant hiss came from the smaller Razak. Neither of them moved. Rage welled up in Eragon. He had chased the Razak for so many weeks that the pain of their murderous deed had dulled within him, but his vengeance was at hand. His wrath exploded like a volcano, fueled even more by his pent-up fury at the slave's plight. A roar broke from his lips, echoing like a thunderstorm as he snatched his bow from his back. Deftly, he fit an arrow to the string and loosed it. Two more followed an instant later. The Razak leapt away from the arrows with inhuman swiftness. They hissed and ran up the aisle between the pews, cloaks flapping like raven wings. Eragon reached for another arrow, but caution stayed his hand. If they knew where to find me, Brahm is in danger as well. I must warn him. Then, to Eragon's horror, a line of soldiers filled the cathedral. And then he glimpsed a field of uniforms jostling outside the doorway. Eragon gazed hungrily at the charging Razak, then swept around, searching for a means of escape. A vestibule to the left of the altar caught his attention. He bounded through the archway and dashed down the corridor that led to the priory of the belfry. The patter of the Razak's feet behind him made him quicken his pace until the hall abruptly ended with a closed door. He pounded against it, trying to get it to open. But the wood was too strong. The Razak were nearly upon him. Frantic, he sucked in his breath and barked, "Gerda!" With a flash, the door splintered into pieces and fell out of the door. Eragon jumped into the small room and continued running. He sped through several chambers, startling a group of priests. Shouts and curses followed him. The priory bell tolled an alarm. Eragon dodged through a kitchen, past a pair of monks, then slipped through the side door. He skidded to a stop in the garden, surrounded by a high brick wall devoid of handholds. There were no other exits. Eragon turned to leave, but there was a low hiss as the Razak shouldered aside the door. Desperate, he rushed at the wall, his arms pumping. Magic could not help him here. If he had used it to break through the wall, he'd be too tired to run. He jumped. Even with his arms outstretched, only his fingertips cleared the edge of the wall. The rest of his body smashed against the bricks, driving out his breath. Eragon gasped and hung there, struggling not to fall. The Razak prowled into the garden, swinging their heads from side to side like wolfhounds, sniffing for prey. Eragon sensed their approach and heaved with his arms. His shoulders shrieked with pain as he scrambled onto the wall and dropped to the other side. He stumbled, then regained his balance and darted down the alleyway, just as the Razak leapt over the wall. Galvanized, Eragon put on another burst of speed. He ran for over a mile before he had to stop and catch his breath, unsure if he had lost the Razak. He found a crowded marketplace and dived under a parked wagon. How did they find me? He wondered, panting. They should have known where I was, unless something happened to Brahm. He reached out with his mind to Saphira and said, "The Razak found me. We're all in danger. Check if Brom's all right. If he is, warn him and have him meet me in the inn. And be ready to fly here as fast as you can. We may need your help to escape." She was silent, then said curtly, "He'll meet you at the inn. Don't stop moving. You're in great danger." "Don't I know it," muttered Eragon as he rolled out from under the wagon. He hurried back to the Golden Globe, quickly packed their belongings, saddled the horses, then led them to the street. Brom soon arrived, staff in hand, scowling dangerously. He swung onto Snowfire and asked, "What happened?" "I was in the cathedral when the Razak just appeared behind me." Let's see. "When the Razak just appeared behind me," said Eragon, climbing onto Kadok. "I ran back as fast as possible, but they could be here any second. Saphira will join us once we're out of Drasleona."
"We have to get outside the city walls before they close the gates, if they haven't already," said Brom. "If they're shut, it will be nigh impossible for us to leave. Whatever you do, don't get separated from me."
Eragon stiffened as ranks of soldiers marched down one end of the street. Brom cursed, lashed Snowfire with his reins, and galloped away. Eragon bent low over Kadok and followed. They nearly crashed several times during the wild, hazardous ride, plunging through masses of people that clogged the streets as they neared the city wall. When the gates finally came into view, Eragon pulled on Kadok's reins with dismay. The gates were already half closed, and a double line of pikemen blocked their way. "They'll cut us to pieces," he exclaimed.
"We have to try and make it," said Brom, his voice hard. "I'll deal with the men, but you keep the gates open for us."
Eragon nodded, gritted his teeth, and dug his heels into Kadok. They plowed towards the line of unwavering soldiers, who lowered their pikes toward the horses' chests and braced the weapons against the ground. Though the horses snorted with fear, Eragon and Brom held them in place. Eragon heard the soldiers shout, but kept his attention on the gates inching shut. As they neared the sharp spikes, Brom raised his hand and spoke. The words struck with precision. The soldiers fell to each side as if their legs had been cut out from under them. The gap between the gates shrank by the second. Hoping that the effort would not prove too much for him, Eragon drew on his power and shouted, "Du Grunder Hungdir!" A deep, grating sound emitted from the gates as they trembled, then ground to a stop. The crowd of guards fell silent, staring with amazement. With the clatter of the horses' hooves, Brom and Eragon shot out from behind Drasleona's walls. The instant they were free, Eragon released the gates. They shuddered, then boomed shut. He swayed with an expected fatigue, but managed to keep riding. Brom watched him with concern. Their flight continued through the outskirts of Drasleona. As alarm trumpets sounded on the city wall, Saphira was waiting for them by the edge of the city, hidden behind some trees. Her eyes burned, her tail whipped back and forth.
"Go ride her," said Brom. "And this time, stay in the air, no matter what happens to me. I'll head south. Fly nearby. I don't care if Saphira's seen."
Eragon quickly mounted Saphira. As the ground dwindled away beneath him, he watched Brom gallop along the road. "Are you all right?" asked Saphira. "Yes," said Eragon, "but only because we were very lucky." A puff of smoke blew from her nostrils. "All the time we've spent searching for the Razak is useless." "I know," he said, letting his head sag against her scales. "If the Razak had been the only enemies back there, I would have stayed and fought, but with all the soldiers on their side, it was hardly a fair match." "You understand that there will be talk of us now. This was hardly an unobtrusive escape. Evading the Empire will be harder than ever." There was an edge to her voice that he was unaccustomed to. "I know." They flew low and fast over the road. Leona Lake receded behind them. The land became dry and rocky and filled with tough, sharp bushes and tall cactuses. Clouds darkened the sky. Lightning flashed in the distance. As the wind began to howl, Saphira glided steeply down to Brom. He stopped the horse and asked, "What's wrong?" "Wind's too strong."
"It's not that bad,"
objected Brom. "It is up there," said Eragon, pointing at the sky. Brom swore and handed him Kadok's reins. They trotted away with Saphira following on foot. Though on ground, she did have a difficulty keeping up with the horses. The gale grew stronger, flinging dirt through the air and twisting it like a dervish. They wrapped scarves around their head to protect their eyes. Brom rode Brom's robe flapped in the wind, while his beard whipped about as if it had a life of its own. Though it would make them miserable, Eragon hoped it would rain so their tracks would be obliterated. Soon darkness forced them to stop. With only the stars to guide them, they left the road and made camp behind 2 boulders. It was too dangerous to light a fire, so they ate cold food while Saphira sheltered them from the wind. After the sparse dinner, Eragon asked bluntly, "How did they find us?" Brom started to light his pipe, but thought better of it and put it away.
"One of the palace servants warned me there were spies among them. Somehow word of me and my questions must have reached Talbor, and through him the Razak."
"We can't go back to Drasleona, can we?" asked Eragon. Brom shook his head.
"Not for a few years."
Eragon held his hand between his heads. Eragon held his head between his hands. "Then should we draw the Razak out? If we let Saphira be seen, they'll come running to wherever she is."
"And when they do, there'll be 50 soldiers with them," said Brom. "At any rate, this isn't the time to discuss it. Right now we have to concentrate on staying alive. Tonight will be the most dangerous, because the Razak will be hunting us in the dark, when they are strongest. We'll have to trade watches until morning."
"Right," said Eragon, standing. He hesitated and squinted. His eyes caught a flicker of movement, a small patch of color that stood out from the surrounding nightscape. He stepped towards the edge of their camp, trying to see it better.
"What is it?"
asked Brom, as he unrolled his blankets. Eragon stared into the darkness and turned back. "I don't know. I thought I saw something. Must have been a bird." Pain erupted in the back of his head, and Saphira roared. Then Eragon toppled to the ground unconscious. And that is the end of that. And the next chapter is The Razak's Revenge. And I will read that at a later date.